Hello. I think I should be on screen right now. All right. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to our Alumna Q&A. I'm Jessie. I'm the Community Events Coordinator for this year's NSUP, which is themed Level Up. Tonight, I'm joined by Barnard alumna Brooke, and tonight we're just going to talk about Brooke's time at Barnard and her career thus far. So I'll pass it off to Brooke to do a little introduction.
Hey everyone, my name is Brooke Jaffe. I'm a Barnard alumna, class of 2014, which, oh wow, that seems so long ago now. I was an English major, concentration in creative writing. Back when I was at Barnard, I was president of the Sci-Fi Club at Columbia, and I was a member of Phi Lexi Society. So I remember that time very fondly. And now I am a writer, narrative writer on League of Legends, working on the thematic development team with skins and events and creating the narratives for that side of things, which is pretty wonderful. So as for people who might be wondering, what does game writing mean? Because it feels like a thing that, it's not anathema, but it's certainly a little bit strange. Writing for games means a different thing for every game. Narrative is a relatively new track in the games industry, which is already a relatively new industry itself. And writing story for a game is a little bit different than writing story for a movie or a TV or something that's more linear or like a book. And so it sort of means something different depending on what game you're working on. For traditional linear games, it is very much like writing a movie. You have a script, you have scenes, you move characters through stuff. But for games, the cool thing on games is that they're interactive. They have choices and they have different things that you can do. So stuff has more choices. Maybe you're mounting out a dialogue tree. For other kinds of games, it's just going to really vary. And for me, who works in a game that's very much not like a narrative game, working on a MOBA, which I'll explain what that is in a second, it's a lot more focused on taking scripts and dialogue and bringing characters to life in the context of that gameplay that already exists. And so it's really fun. It's very interdisciplinary, and I also have a background in design too, and I feel like game writing and design really go hand in hand. So I work at a company called Riot Games based out of LA. And Riot is mostly well known for League of Legends, which is its title. It's been around for over 10 years now. Wow. And it's what you would call a MOBA, which is a multiplayer online battle arena game where you have teams of 5, you have characters, you're trying to essentially not like capture the flag, but you're trying to invade the enemy team's camp and destroy their battlements essentially. And it's this very large cast of sort of a colorful cast of characters. I think there's 153, I think now. And it's become such a beautiful, huge title that's been in service for a very long time. So it's really exciting to be able to work on that. Jessie.
Right. Yeah, I will be honest, even after reading about League of Legends, I still have trouble understanding everything. I think there's too many characters to just understand like a sitting.
That's fair.
I feel like it's weird that there's like a magical like angel basically, and then like right next to it is like a raccoon that's small and like shoots a cannon.
Yeah. I mean,
I just think it's funny.
It's fun. Yeah. I mean, so it's so with games like League that are not like, narrative first games, like one of the things is, the span of characters that you deal with in a game like League is pretty wide because they're supposed to represent all different kinds of play styles. And the world is sort of like a backdrop to the main gameplay, right? I am a fan of finding the lore out for every given game I play because that's the kind of gamer I am personally. So of course, even before I started working on League, I was in it. I was like, I want to know everything about Runeterra. I want to know all these characters. I want to know how they relate to each other. And there was always sort of a problem of like, okay, well, why is a god on the field with like a rat? And those are two characters that operate on the same playing field. But it's part of the experience. It's part of the it's part of the equal playing field for anyone. And even though like narratively those different power scopes, gameplay wise, they represent different possibilities and designs that are really cool and compelling in their own right.
Right. So speaking of lore, let's move on to your lore and talk about your time at Barnard.
Yeah.
So how did you end up coming to Barnard?
So I actually was a transfer student. I came in my sophomore year I had done my first year at a different school, and it was just not a great fit. But I spent a lot of time going to New York. So I'm from California originally, and I really decided I wanted to live on the East Coast for undergrad. I wanted to try living, over there and see what it's like, and very much enjoyed it. But I ended up, spending a lot of time with my sister who's at NYU, and I was like, I love New York. I want to be there. I don't want to be at NYU necessarily because it's not really doesn't really fit my sort of style, but. I found out about Barnard and sort of toured the campus and really loved it and really loved the sort of, the support network and the ethos of it all. And so I applied there to transfer, got in, and transferred my sophomore year. I will say though, I did not know what I wanted to do. I did not have a major in mind. I've been writing for a long time just for fun. And so I was like, look, you know what? I don't know what exactly I want to do. For a while, I thought I wanted to go to international relations. For a while, I, wanted to do lots of different things. But writing was sort of the most consistent thing that I really enjoyed doing. And, I really liked literature and essays and stuff like that. So I ended up with an English major and really delighted in it. So it worked out. And I'm so happy that I ended up at Barnard, frankly. I think it was an amazing experience. So.
Mm-hmm. And then, so as a transfer student, how are you able to find community, going into it, coming from another school?
I'll say it definitely was harder. I think when you transfer in, or when you start as a freshman, everybody's kind of in the same boat. Everybody is there with not a lot of background, not people don't know each other. Everyone's sort of trying to find a circle of friends, and everyone's sort of in the same place. Whereas when you transfer in, everybody's kind of established. They've had their first year, and that can make things a little bit more difficult. So it really involved a lot more legwork than I think coming in as a regular freshman would. But I found my friend group pretty well by especially going through clubs, going through, Sci-Fi Club introduced me to a lot of people. Philo introduced me to a lot of people. And sort of gave me at least a basis to then go out and meet other folks. Because that's the thing about friends and making friends and sort of establishing yourself at a new school is people open up other people. Like things sort of exponentially get easier. The more people you can connect with and engage with. And also I had a lot of really lovely girls who I was in the dorm with and stuff like that. And talking to people who I lived next door to who I might not have met otherwise was really great too. So that's what I found was really helpful for sort of establishing myself and sort of finding myself in the middle of a school of people who, like I said, were already kind of had their thing going and I had to find my place in it. So.
Right. And then you mentioned that you hopped around majors, wanted to study international relations for a bit. So then how did you settle on English and specifically creative writing?
So like I said, I've been writing just for fun for a long time. I spent a lot of time, especially through high school and pretty much from middle school through high school, I really liked writing stories. I love characters. I love making up characters. I love making up stories. I was always very engaged on that. And just did it for fun. And it was the kind of thing where it's look, it's something I enjoy enough to do in my free time and to actively choose to do that in my free time. And if I don't know what else I want to be doing, or if I don't have a strong sort of career drive yet, and I don't really know what's going on, what brings me joy? What sparks joy? As it says. And writing it in stories did that. Both English and as far as reading literature and stuff like that. I was very much a big bookworm, but also sort of writing my own stuff, which is why I went creative writing specifically. I do love me a good literary analysis essay, but I think where I tend to gravitate to is especially fiction and creative writing in that sense. So.
And then, so what about Barnard? What about Barnard specifically? Do you think prepared you in a way that you don't think you would have received at other schools? I'm stumbling over my words.
I think I got the most. Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, going to Barnard gave me a crash course in intersectional feminism and media studies, just by existing on campus in a way that I found very helpful and and it really influenced the way that I come to understand and appreciate the media that I consume, which is incredibly important being someone who works in making media. And I did follow up on that by actually taking women's gender studies classes at school. But it really exposed me to a lot of ideas that I think, and a lot of lenses through which to look at things that I really just had not experienced otherwise. And so it was really invaluable having that. And also having people who talk about it so openly and having that dialogue and that really, like challenging but supportive and fierce discussion that I feel like shaped the way that I understand the world around me in a lot of ways. And I feel like that's so baked into Barnard's culture, and is really wonderful and valuable. So
Yeah. And then as you moved through Barnard and like moved on to postgrad, what like when you came out of college, what did you want to do? Did you know specifically that game design was or like game design and writing was what you wanted to do?
I had no idea. Coming out of school, I was really lost. I was like, I know I like writing, but I don't really know what to do with that. And I just come out of school, and so I ended up working at a bookstore for a year, and I just through a lot of different things, trying to sort of figure out what felt good and sort of what I wanted to pursue, because it's really not easy. And I feel like I like being very upfront about how much of a struggle it was, because I feel like when I was struggling through it, I was like, oh, it feels like everybody knows what they want to do and they know where they're going and they know exactly what they're, but it's really not true. And I think being honest with myself about that struggle and sort of figuring out what my vector was, it took a while. But I came to games because I've been playing games for as long as I can remember. They've always been a big part of my life and a thing that I really loved. I just never really had thought of them as like a career path for a long time. It was just sort of a thing that I enjoyed, but it was never a thing I really thought of in that way. But sort of in looking at sort of what were the consistent sort of forces in my life, that was a big part of it. Like I've always really loved games, and it's always something I've been passionate about. And so, it's like, okay, well, why not give it a shot? Like, and I didn't really know what in games I wanted to do at first either. But I ended up doing QA, which is a way that a lot of people's first games jobs happen, which is you're on the QA team, which basically means that you're playtesting, you're writing playtests, you're like people hand you content and you're finding bugs and writing them up and then handing them to the developers. And you interface with all different departments in a game studio, which is really helpful because it sort of lets you kind of have a peek into what they all do. Game development is a really disciplinary process, sort of inherently, and that's part of what I really enjoy about it. Some people are like auteurs who can make one game on their own, and it's amazing, and those people I respect so much. But most games, I would say, come from a big team. It's a big team of people doing different things. And there's artists, there's 3D modelers, there's animators, there's sound people, there's QA, there's design, there's production, which is so important. There's all these different disciplines all have to sort of coordinate and work together. And so QA gets to interface with all of those, which is really nice. And it sort of let me figure out like, oh, I really like this environment. I don't necessarily want to be doing this for the rest of my life, but like, I really like this environment. I like these people, I like what it feels like to make games. And so from there was how I was like, okay, I know I enjoy this, but what I really feel like I need to sort of advance my career was more technical knowledge, was how to sort of do this myself, how to work in an engine, like how to think about design and iterating on a game design. And that's sort of how I ended up going to graduate school at USC, which I graduated last year with my master's in interactive media and game design.
Congrats.
And that's what that experience really gave me was that hands-on experience of making stuff, of doing it myself, of trying out all these different sort of elements of production, and culminating in getting to direct my own project, which was really rewarding and is confirmed that like I want to direct someday. It's really I loved it, and it was such a cool experience. But my specialty sort of as I used at USC was definitely narrative. Like I come from a storytelling background, I come from a writing background, and understanding how narrative is different in an interactive space I think is really important and is sort of undervalued, or not undervalued, but like people don't sort of see it from the outside. But going there really solidified like, yeah, I have something to contribute here, this is my expertise. And sort of gave me a strong sort of sense of purpose and directionality to what I want to do with my career.
I think on the note of like people being like auteurs and being able to do it all, I remember somebody told me that the person who designed Stardew Valley like did the whole thing themselves because they got fired from Blizzard, spent 7 years, and built this entire game by themselves. But that is such an anomaly from like a game like League of Legends or Valorant, where they're needs to be so many people working on so many
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah, and also to make it clear, there's also a really great scope in between that. You know, like you have like these solo projects, like an Undertale or like a Stardew Valley, or like even Among Us, which I think is a team of 3 people who developed that game.
Yeah.
But there's also like smaller indie studios. There's studios that are like, you know, 10, 15, 20 people. The team that did Hades, if you've heard of Hades, which is an amazing game, beautiful. I think it's like, you know, 20, 25 people like did that whole game. You know, and so there's a scale to it. You know, you have big AAA usually up here, and then you have sort of indie titles, and there's maybe a pretty sizable gap between those two. But broadly speaking, there's a scale to it, and you can make some really amazing things with not as many people. And the sky's the limit, which is kind of the cool thing. It's such a new industry, and everything is so. It's like we are in. I remember I was talking to a professor, and he was saying, like, as far as games go, we're in like the silent film era of games. Like that, like if you're comparing to like film, like we're innovating at such a rate, and it's just going to take off. And I feel like that's such an exciting point to be in right now, and to feel like, you know, sort of on that frontier, and what that means is really cool.
Yeah, right before we went live, we were having a discussion about being able to play video games with like different types of controllers, and Brooke mentioned somebody being able to play, I forget what was the game, but playing with a baguette and being able to use that to control. Yeah.
Someone played Overwatch. I played Widowmaker with a baguette, and the joke being that she's like a French sniper, and so someone's hooked up a baguette with a bunch of like Arduino pieces, which is like basically Arduino. It's like these little chipsets that you can make controllers out of. And hook them up to weird things, and it's very fun. And there's lots of flexibility and possibilities there. But it's pretty awesome.
I think that's the pinnacle of like human like engineering. Like C's engineering for humanity, the baguette sniper rifle.
No, also my favorite example of that in a lot of ways was Twitch Plays Pokemon. I don't know if you've sort of heard of that or people have heard of that, but a while ago, a few years ago, someone set up a game of like original Pokemon Red and Blue, where the chat in Twitch controlled the game. So people would, you know, say like go up, go down, hit A, hit B, like, and they beat Pokemon like collectively as a crowd. But the game experience was so fascinating and strange, and had created this entire language and culture around it that was like a narrative, like a lore. Like people took this sort of random, you know, like people just trying to make things happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh no, so this Pokemon was named because people just kept hitting A, but like actually that it was ATV, and so it's an all-terrain Venomoth, and so it's like, you know, people came up with just this really elaborate, amazing storytelling around something that was ostensibly kind of just data points. And I feel like that's a lot of like a really good procedural narrative can be kind of like that too, where it's like, you know, things happen and they unfold individually in a way that they would not unfold. There's a small percent chance that it would ever unfold like that exactly ever again. And the things we can create from that it's really beautiful. This game called Blaseball that I am obsessed with right now. It's on hiatus currently, but it's very much like that. And it's basically like someone took a baseball simulator, but like if baseball was in like an Eldritch alternate dimension, and like players get incinerated, and like it's I don't have time to explain all of it, but there's some really amazing stuff. At the end, I'll give you my Twitter. So if anyone has questions or wants to ask me about cool games and stuff, I'm always happy to give people recommendations or explain things more, because I appreciate we only have so much time, and I could talk about this forever. So
I love that. Gaming Twitter always pops off. Always something new. And then going more in depth into like your career, the gaming industry is like known to be like a very like male dominated industry, and like even our social like connotations of who is a gamer, like what are games, is so much from like a male perspective. So how have you navigated entering in this space and succeeding in this space as a woman?
So it's honestly, it's not always easy. I kind of came into the gaming space in that sort of, you know, young tomboy way of like, I am one of the guys. I just happen to be a girl, which, you know, is a very sort of based in child's understanding, I guess. But that was sort of, you know, what I grew up doing. But the more I sort of exist in games, the more I am really passionate and dedicated to taking away those sort of barriers and like those sort of connotations. Because over half of all gamers are like, you know, across all kinds of games, women make up just as much of the player base as men do. You know, divided by irrespective of genre or anything like that. what we classify as a quote unquote gamer is honestly a little archaic at this point. And more women and queer folk are really, coming to the forefront of these spaces. And it's definitely not, it's definitely a work in progress. If anyone's been following sort of the Activision Blizzard stuff recently, and even Riot Once Upon a Time had had its own share of horrific shit happening. Sorry. But I've been really fortunate in my experience that I have really not had a lot of overt misogyny directed my way. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It definitely does. And I think it's studios have very different cultures from studio to studio. And I know that, like, unfortunately, part of my career search process was like, is this a place where I feel safe? Do I feel like this is going to be a studio that's toxic or not? And a lot of it has been about, finding your people, find other women, find queer people, band together, and learn how to sort of, support each other and stand up for yourselves and trust your gut, but for all that being said, like I said, I have really not experienced a lot of very direct misogyny, and I feel very thankful for that. But I've also just met a lot of really wonderful people. I feel like this old guard of just gross, misogynistic people is being outed. They're being outed, and they're being, it's that stuff isn't flying anymore, and people are calling them out, and people are making that change. And that's, I think, the most important thing. And that's part of, for me, and navigating the space is about being part of that, and setting a new standard for what we will accept treatment-wise, setting a standard for what we expect out of representation, setting a standard for what we expect out of these conversations, and what we want our world of gaming to look like. And I'm so excited to see, like, the progress that has been made and is continued to, continue to flourish, and it's certainly not over, but it's going. And I have met so many wonderful, women and queer folk who are making incredible strides and are really holding us all to the standard that we can and should live up to. And it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it applies to, like, all industries that involves like content creation and media, like movies, entertainment, all of that. It's so important for, like, minorities and underrepresented groups to be, like, featured, but then also to be the ones creating it, because it's not enough just for there to be, like, female characters. It's still female characters through, like, through a male gaze, really.
Yeah,
to use the academic sense.
Yes, yeah,
academic term for it.
Yeah. And I think, like, the other sort of side of this is, like, obviously I am a white lady. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's also advocating for people and trying to say, like, hey, we should have somebody in this space who is, we should have more diverse people in this writer's room. We should have more diverse people in the studio. So it's not like and using sort of, privilege where you have it to advocate for other people and advance together, like pull each other up, because that's the way that things get done. And so, it's so important to acknowledge and really let that intersectional experience drive things. And whether that be, using your privilege well where you have it, or supporting other people who don't, and really advancing yourself if you're sort of in a position where you're trying to make your voice heard. So.
So then, to the students that are joining us that are really interested in getting more involved into, like, the gaming industry, as, like, a writer, developer, even doing sound and engineering, what sort of advice would you give them to, like, get their foot in the door, basically?
I think, like, the sort of advice that I would give to like, I think most people in general is, like, just keep creating on your own, and, like, constantly, if you're a writer, write, if you're a programmer, make stuff, like the more that you can just, even for yourself, explore what you can do and keep sort of pushing your craft, the better it is. And games is an interesting space because it's not a space that has a lot of, like, I have a master's and I think graduate school is the right choice for me, but it's also a space where you don't necessarily need a degree to succeed. it's much more about your work, your portfolio, your merit, and your ability also to work in a team. And that's also something I cannot overstate. That's part of this whole movement is you can't accept people who are jerks but are brilliant. That's not, it does not fly. Because it is a team effort, and working with other people is so important. So yeah, I think advice is just really hone your craft, like really love your craft, like really and also try and expand your knowledge of what the holistic process of game development looks like. If you're like, for me as a writer, like I did sound design for fun, and tried that, and sort of like, okay, what does this look like? Try design, try animation, like try your hand at things so you understand how other people work, because it makes it much easier to work with those other people when you get into a setting where you're in a studio. And also, so it's just, and more, maybe more of a soft skills thing, know how to advocate yourself and don't undersell yourself. Your voice is important. You are worthy. You can do this. And I find the best people are often the ones who do not believe in themselves enough. And like the people who should, by all rights, have the most confidence and really be putting themselves forward, often can sort of shy away from it, and so really it's something that I sometimes struggle with too, like don't apologize for yourself in that way, like don't sort of pull yourself back, like say like, no, my work is important, I have a voice that is worth hearing, I am a good developer, I can make things, and have that confidence, and to try and build that confidence as much as possible. I literally had a talk with the senior writer on my team the other day, because I was like, I had to edit a script to do something, and he was like, dude, you're fine, like you're doing great, like don't you don't have to apologize for any given mistake, like it's drafting, things like that. So it happens to the best of us, but it's worth reminding yourself, and then the other thing is learn your creative process, learn how to pace yourself so you don't burn out, because that's the other big problem in the gaming industry. Sometimes because especially when people love what they do, they want to do it a lot, but don't burn yourself out. It's not worth it. Knowing how to set boundaries between your professional and your personal life is also really important. And even your professional and your creative life to a certain degree. Not every game you work on is going to be like, this is the most fulfilling game I've ever worked on. Know where to find your creative fulfillment as well, but still learn how to find the joy in what you do. I think those are all just skills that take time and experience to learn, but are really key. And yeah, boundaries, super important. So yeah, I'm off the clock now is a very powerful, empowering thing to say.
Yeah. I think that's great advice for like people that don't even want to go into the gaming industry. Like oftentimes, like there's so many industries where Barnard students end up going into that are like male dominated, that there's a lot of underrepresented, like there aren't a lot of underrepresented groups that have a seat at the table. And it's about like making space for yourself, being confident in the work that you're doing, because you deserve to. And like,
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, like you end up never undersell yourself. Like, I think that's such a great piece of advice. And like, I need to hear that too. It's a great reminder.
Tell myself that still. So, it's an ongoing thing. It's everyone needs that reminder, I think, a lot of the time. But I will say it as many times as anyone needs to hear. And it cannot be understated, the importance of having that confidence.
And then as like switching topics a little bit, as a writer and as a game designer, how do you approach writing a script for a video game? Does that differ from the way you approach like creative writing in the more traditional sense that we would think of it?
Yeah, I mean, so like I mentioned before, writing for any given game is different. Like based on genre, yes, but also just based on mechanics. I think, in my opinion, I think that good narrative and good game design go hand in hand and should really work together. So working closely with whatever the design of the game is in order to tell the best story you can is so important. So the way I would write a script for, like I said, something that's more linear, might be more like a movie script kind of thing. And then you have like a cutscene and you do gameplay, and then you have another cutscene and you do more gameplay. But writing for something that's, like a walking simulator where it's like you're just moving through a space and it's much more about being sort of an embodied presence in a digital space, that's going to look really different. Something like What Became of Edith Finch or something like that is a very different kind of game. And so the scripts for those things accordingly are going to look very different. I know for like games like League or like a lot of these sort of live service or like FPS or MOBAs or things like that, because you don't have like cutscenes or anything, you don't have like narrative moments that are specific to narrative. The narrative is sort of coming through the rest of the gameplay as well, or is relying on people sort of going outside to seek it out. What you're trying to do is tell a story in a concise way that basically elevates the player experience and sort of fulfills that player fantasy of whatever that character is, whatever that narrative beat is. So like if you're playing like, a superhero character, then you're going to want to feel like I'm saying things. I feel like a superhero. I feel disempowered. I feel like and sort of tell that story while you're also, going and playing and doing objectives or whatever else you're working on. And that's a very different kind of narrative. But they're all valuable, and they're all, I think, really, they all present different challenges creatively that I really like tackling. They all sort of mean different things. So, some scripts are going to look like an Excel spreadsheet of lines that basically have like, when the player does this, then trigger this line. Right. Or some look like film scripts where you have like player characters. They said this, your stage directions, like, and actually it's funny in some ways. Games are much more akin to theater or like immersive experiences. What's an interesting thing about the program I came from is that it's interactive media and game design, but also it's the same program that people do art installations. It's the same program people do theme parks. It's the same program people do. I think a friend of mine was like an intern on Sleep No More, and it's very much like that kind of thing. So it's all like those things are all really related because it's about being embodied in a space. And so it's in some ways it's more like a theatrical experience than it is almost like a movie sometimes too, which is really interesting because your player isn't, you don't always know where your player's going to be located, or they're going to be located somewhere that is not as a passive observer. They're going to be someone interacting with this world. And that's also, I think, part of what changes the context in which you're writing and the way in which you have to write that to make it make sense.
A personal question for me that I'm curious about is at Riot and on League of Legends, like how much of like the narrative influences mechanics and how much do like mechanics influence the narrative? So like, you... Oh, yeah, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off the question. For something like League, where it is very much a gameplay first thing, it's definitely the mechanics usually come first, and then the narrative sort of, for what I do, the mechanics come first and the narrative sort of follows. But that's not to say that it doesn't ever go the other way around, especially for introducing new characters to the game. Sometimes it'll be like, hey, narratively, this is a really cool idea of a person that will exist in this world and in this space. Like, what we want to explore, what this feels like storytelling wise. And then, designers are like, oh, there's a kid I think it would look really cool. That'd be really cool with that sort of story. Because like I said, good game design is good storytelling. Right. The verb, like there's an exercise you do in Latin game design, which is like, what are the verbs the player can do? And like, how do those verbs sort of tell the story of what you are doing? Like if I am, if I'm a support, like I am healing, I'm protecting, like what kind of character is that? It's a different kind of character than somebody who is like, stealth and trying to like, sneak attack things. Like that's a very different experience. It's a very different narrative that you're telling mechanically, as well as, in a story sense or in a personal sense for that character. So it's usually for something like League, it's very much like game design tends to come first, but not always. And that's not to say that is that way for every game. I think there's a lot of them that goes the other way around. So.
And then, so what has been your favorite game that you've like written the script for or served as like the game designer for?
I'm biased. It's probably my thesis project because that was the first game. Like from start to finish, I ideated it. I, built a team. We put it together. And funny enough, it actually was not a very narrative game, all things considered. It was sort of stepping outside my comfort zone doing this, which is a game called Bottles. Which was much more sort of like a mobile puzzle game, essentially, that uses the gyroscope in a phone to essentially rotate a level around your character. So it's sort of like you're exploring a world in a bottle, and you're moving your character and sort of trying to solve puzzles to advance through. But also it was so much about like the experience of having sort of like a physicality thing in a digital way. The physicality of rotating something and what that's like and how that changes the way that you engage with the game. Because it feels like something's in your hand. And so that one specifically also was a lot of an accessibility thing, because as much about you should be able to play with one hand was sort of a big part of the design. and so working on that was so rewarding because it was a cool mechanic. And I at the first thought of it, and I was like, someone's had to have done this before, right? Like, there's so many games out there. Someone's had to have done this kind of design. And sort of doing that research, like, no, actually, I came up with something that is pretty novel and I'm pretty proud of, and getting to develop that. And the challenges that come with that, because one of the things about doing something very novel, especially in games, is that you have to teach players how to play it, which is easy. Because so much of interacting with a game is based on what other games you've interacted with and your understanding of what games can be and what games are. So how do you teach someone an entirely new set of mechanics? Like, how do you bring a player into that? So the challenges were very design focused in a lot of ways. But it was so rewarding. And I feel like it's my favorite because I got to work with some fantastic, young developers at my school and make something that, in the end, like we went into beta right as COVID hit, which really made the end of that game development process kind of just, we were all so wrecked, because everyone wasn't that long ago. And in some ways, sort of made that finishing out that game very difficult, but I'm still really proud of what we were able to accomplish. I'm really proud of the kind of game that we did come up with. And it was such an invaluable experience learning how to lead a team and design, in this way. So that was definitely, game development is hard. It's very rewarding. It's very fun, but it's definitely a labor of love in some ways. And it's also not for everybody, because there's definitely a lot of people I know who love playing games, but like making games is a different beast. And you have to sort of be able to kind of do both to do a lot of game development.
Yeah, I think it's like also like the whole idea where it's like, I see a lot on Twitter, people being like, oh, I've never had an original thought ever. But when you come up with something like being able to like a new game mechanic or just really like anything in your work, like it's like such a satisfying feeling. Like even in like a classroom where you are like, oh, I've never heard of anybody interpreting like this text this way. And just like bringing that to the table, I feel like it's such a mind-blowing, like
it's
satisfying
an amazing
feeling.
Yeah, exactly. So
I do want to take this time to address the audience. If you do have questions, feel free to submit those in chat. And we have our lovely moderator, Allie, who's in chat, who can help. Thank you, Allie. Shout out, Allie. Who can help us, can get those questions to us. Otherwise, I'm going to start with the pre-submitted questions that you lovely folks submitted earlier. The first question is, what kind of classes did you take in game design school?
Yeah, so in my program, we started with some basic stuff about game development process and iteration, like working on how do you take, an idea and build that out. Like, how do you play test? So this is like what this game is, build out a prototype of it. When you play test, like what information do you get from that? How do you use that to influence another iteration? And sort of the structure of a game development process and what that looks like on a micro and macro level. I personally did a lot of interactive writing classes, obviously. That was a big thing, but also production. It was a class I opted to take because production is so key. Oh my God, I cannot overstate how important a good producer is, and understanding how that works and what a producer does, which essentially is they're the ones who keep everything running. They're the ones who coordinate tasks. They're the ones who make sure that you're hitting deadlines. They're the ones who are not necessarily like in engine, but they are making sure that all the clockwork is running. Everyone's coordinated. Everyone's on the same page, and looking at it as a holistic product. And that's such a key skill. I took sound design classes and learned how to work in a sound engine, which is really cool. Programming classes, obviously, and working in engine from a design perspective was really key, especially because I was someone who went in with no programming knowledge whatsoever. And even now, like, my knowledge is pretty basic, but I understand how code gets structured. I understand how scripts work. I understand how those things call each other and interact and how game objects work. And that influences the way that I write as well, which is really cool. So I tried to dip my toe into most, in any given discipline that I could. And also that involved working on a lot of other projects. Other students' thesis, like my upperclassmen's thesis projects. I art directed for one. I was a writer on another. Like things like that. And so, what does working with a small indie team look like, and that process too? So, it was sort of across the board. I also took some film classes because at USC is a weird thing. where the game design, like interactive media, is part of the film school. We're kind of like it was kind of like the weird redheaded stepchild of the film school. Let's be real, but it was really cool to sort of look at, okay, how does cinematography, how does film sort of tell these stories differently, but also how is that language really carried over into games? Because games is an interesting media that borrows both from software and from cinema, and equally. And I feel like that's such an interesting and specific intersection. And so learning how that language works was really, really cool.
Oh, and then, oh my gosh, Allie, with the graphics.
Yeah.
We have a question from YouTube, which is, as a former English major, to what extent do you think knowledge in STEM is necessary for humanity majors? I know you're probably biased as somebody who gets to straddle both humanities and STEM.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my book, I don't feel like you can have one without the other in a complete way. Like, I think I'm a big believer in the interconnectedness of all topics of study. Nothing exists in a vacuum. STEM topics exist in concert with art and storytelling, and those things all are so intertwined. So as far as not, I don't think you need to necessarily be an expert in anything, because I think expecting anybody to be an expert in everything is unreasonable and is just going to sort of end up being a disappointment, because no one can learn everything. There's too much in the world to know. But I think having a basic understanding, being able to communicate and know how to have conversations with people in STEM on their topic intelligently, like even if I don't understand the depth of what they're doing, or if I don't understand all the nitty gritty of it, I can have an intelligent conversation and know how to ask questions and how to communicate and how to get that information. And I think that's so important, both for people coming from STEM to humanities and humanities to STEM sort of topics, is knowing how to talk, and even if you don't have the information, knowing how to get the information that you need in order to do your work and to appreciate sort of everything that's going on. So, yeah, necessary,
okay,
sort of. I guess. But, yeah.
And I guess that leads to our next question, which is, I'm not sure. The question is, what science classes did you take knowing that you would choose a career path in video game design? I guess a better way to phrase this question now would be what science classes would you advise taking, or do you wish that you took earlier on?
Oh, I mean, yeah. See, since I didn't know I wanted to go into game design, I ended up taking psychology classes, and I really loved those and found those really interesting and helpful. I feel like understanding how people process information is really key to understanding your player. And so much of game design is about both the sort of analysis and empathy of how people work. Both understanding emotionally, how your player is going to feel going through a space or doing a mechanic, or what you're asking of them and how they're reacting, but also cognitively understanding the effect of what you're presenting has on them, I think is really helpful. So I'm a big fan of psych. I think it's so fascinating, endlessly fascinating. And I think it is really useful for game development, just to have that knowledge of the way that people process information.
Oh, and we have a message from Kate, or a question. Hello to Kate.
Hello.
How do you approach world building, and what tips do you have for creative writers with no experience in game design to explore the interactive media space?
That's an awesome question. So when I approach world building, there's two different ways that you can kind of approach. For me, when I want to tell a story, I feel like there's two different ways you can kind of approach it. You can kind of approach it from the world in or the character out. And that's not necessarily true, to have everyone does it, but this is sort of how I like to think about it, which is usually when I have a story idea or something and I want to sort of figure out what do I want to play with here. Sometimes it'll be I have a big idea, I want to tell a story about X, and you sort of pick out, okay, so that's sort of like a world in situation, right? What world would sort of convey or interact with that concept? What would the people that have to live in that world look like? Okay, what would an individual character that I feel like was compelling would look like in that world? Or you can sort of say, I have this idea for a character. I want a person whose central conflict is Y. And from there, it's okay, well, so where did that come from? When did that, how did this person develop into this state? What kind of world would they have had to live in order to sort of evoke that? And then what would that larger world look like? What would the implications be? So I think that there's some ways you can play with that I find are very sort of actionable and, sort of a cool way of sort of generating thoughts. And I find that brainstorming and just sort of spitballing and also talking to other people I'm a big believer also in I love collaboration. I love talking to other people. I love throwing ideas at people and sort of seeing how they react, and sort of having a dialogue. And I think so once you have sort of those ideas for a world, like saying, hey, what am I not thinking of here? Like, what do you think of when I say this? Is also a really great way to sort of generate more thoughts and develop that idea for a world. So, but as far as the second part, without no experience in game design to explore interactive media, I think play games. Like it sounds so simple, but there's a lot of really wonderful games that are that tell stories in cool and interesting new ways that aren't necessarily technically demanding or mechanically demanding. Like I don't need to be able to, be a pro sniper in order to like play through a story-based game that presents an interesting idea of how narrative works. If you ever want, I'm happy to sort of have my list of like games I think do a really cool job of telling stories in creative ways. But I think also appreciating how player agency interacts with story, because that is really the chief thing about interactive media is your player, your viewer, your audience is present in one way or another. So first of all, how are they present? Or how active are they? Can they change everything? Can they only change specific things? Is it just them being embodied in a space? And then understanding sort of how that changes the way that they understand a story, in the way that sort of a first person story feels very different than a third person story. You can in games, it's kind of true too. If you have a first person camera, it's very different than sort of having a character outside that you're looking down on. And it's so understanding sort of what the language around that looks like, and what the stories feel like and how that feels different, I think is a really good place to start for interactive. And also there's a lot of really cool videos, especially on YouTube and stuff like that, of developers talking about when they made games, like what the process was. I know talking about Hades, Supergiant Games is a studio that has a really wonderful series of documentaries. I think No Clip is the people that do them, about the development process of that entire game, and the narrative part is so fascinating. So there's a lot of really cool resources out there that I definitely recommend.
And then I guess like I do want to, this is like the one question I had to make sure we got in here, which is like, what 5 games shaped you? I've seen it all on Twitter. I finally have a formal place to discuss it.
So oh God, choosing is very difficult because I feel like there's so many games that, change the way that I understand media and also myself and also game design. That there's so many different sort of axes on which you could sort of ask that question. But as far as like, I'm going to sort of focus on like trajectory of my sort of life and career, and also my craft. First game probably be Pokemon, because that was the first game that I was so invested in as a kid growing up. It sort of was what introduced me to the power of what games can be and how much they can mean. My favorite stories when I was a kid, I don't remember what the context was. I told my mom at one point, like, if I ever get my first tattoo, I'm gonna get a Pokemon tattoo. I was probably like 10. Let's not get a tattoo. And she was like, well, are you going to regret that when you're at college? And here I am as a game developer, however many years later. I don't have a Pokemon tattoo, but I don't think I would regret it necessarily if it was tasteful. So, you never know where life's going to take you. And then another game is Final Fantasy X. It was the first Final Fantasy game I ever played. It was the first sort of like adult RPG story that I really fell into, and that whole series has been really influential sort of in my life as both a game consumer and also a creative. But that was the first one I ever played and meant so much, and it's such a beautiful story. And again, like it sort of opened me up to like, oh, like these are the kind of powerful, beautiful stories you can tell in the course of a game. And it's very straightforward, it's very linear, but it's still it's such a place in my heart. And also that soundtrack is amazing. Other games, I think one that should not be overlooked, not just digital games. I've played a lot of D&D in my life, Dungeons and Dragons, 5th edition. And I'm a big believer in just tabletop RPGs in general, which is sort of I'm sort of going around the answer, but because it's like, oh, tabletop RPGs, that's a lot of games. But D&D is the one I play the most, so I'll just use that one as an example. But it's collaborative storytelling in analog. You can do things in analog tabletop games that you cannot do in digital. They're reactive in a way that you can't understand. Having a person telling a story with other people gives you so much more just power narratively, and to tell stories that appeal to your audience, because it's a very specific audience, people sitting around you. The catharsis of it is beautiful. It takes on a lot of, I have a whole spiel about how I think tabletop RPGs are sort of, it's like an oral tradition of storytelling that like historically has existed for as long as humans have. And it sort of harkens to that instinct in people of telling stories and embodying stories and catharsis, and it's awesome. So I cannot recommend tabletop RPGs enough in general. D&D is the go-to biggest one, which is very much, sword and sorcery fantasy, but like there's a tabletop RPG for pretty much everything, and any kind of setting you could want, any kind of system you could want. So it's a wonderful space. Other games, I think that's 3. The other one, there's a small indie game that I played called We Know the Devil, and it's a beautiful little game. Most people haven't heard of it. It's very weird, or not weird, but it's very, very obscure. It's also kind of weird, but it's very small indie game. It's mostly like a visual novel style, so it's mostly just clicking options. But the mechanic is so simple and so emotionally resonant, and just really hits exactly what it wants to do in the time that it has. Because it's about like three young people at like a summer camp, and it's the mechanic is when you have 3 people, someone will always be left out. It's basically about being the third wheel, and so all the conversations you have, you get to sort of pair people together of those 3, and what happens when you leave that third person out changes the story. And it's such a very succinct, beautiful game. And also, it's also, a really wonderful queer title, dealing with identity and just a lot of it. I can't overstate it. I don't want to spoil anything of it. It's a little dark, so, but it's very good. Can't recommend that enough. And that was really just a very, it sort of represents to me a large swath of indie games that are really beautiful and resonant and just are very specific, but are so elegant in their design. So that I think represents that. And then I guess the other one I just would be Bastion, which is by Supergiant Games. It's the first of their stuff. Supergiant, I think, is one of my favorite game studios of all time. They're the ones who did Hades, like I mentioned before. Bastion was just the first game that I played of them, so I sort of used it as a shorthand for all the games that followed because it's what introduced me to their titles. But incredible work. Beautiful games, amazing. They always do something interesting and cool with their stories, and sort of challenge, be like, oh, I did not know you could even go there. Like, amazing. Mm-hmm. And also, what I like about them as a developer is that they're all done without crunch. It's by a really dedicated team that is really sustainable and good, development practices. And it just proves that is a thing that you can make these amazing, beautiful, mind-blowing games in a healthy, sustainable way. And that means so much to me. As a developer, and someone in an industry where that isn't always, the reality. So,
and I guess we have with our one last question from Kate, which is, what stories, narratives, creatives do you refer to for inspiration and new perspectives on design?
I mean, I'm a big believer in, my primary medium is games, right? But I believe in drawing from all different kinds of stories. So I think I don't have specific like people or narratives necessarily, but I believe in consuming a breadth of stuff, like seeing theater, like seeing go like watching movies, like reading lots of books, like pulling narrative and inspiration from all different ways of telling stories and all different sort of things in life. Because I think one of the things I learned as a writer in general is that like nothing is ever wasted. No random experience you have is ever wasted, because it'll all inform your understanding of the world. It'll all it might come up in a story sometime. You don't know, but anything can be a part of a story or can influence a story. And so having a breadth of experiences and knowledge having a breadth of experiences and knowledge and consuming a lot of different kinds of media is so invaluable. And opens you up just to so many different opportunities and ideas that if you're like, I think the thing that game developers sometimes fall into is everyone loves games. Obviously you wouldn't if you weren't there, but people just only play games. They don't think about, okay, what about movies? What about TV? What about books? What about, and it's so essential to have that breadth as well, and sort of keep your eyes out to the world. I think is what I would say for that.
I think my one last point is, I think it's, like video games also don't exist in a vacuum too. Like it can totally expand the way you engage with a certain type of media. And like the thing that comes to mind for me is like, if anybody here has played the Kim Kardashian video game, I feel like then you get like, it's a whole nother way to engage with like the Kardashians, with like everything that's going on, like society, social media. Like it's a whole new dimension of it. And it's still like, you're still a gamer if you play, like a mobile game as well.
Yeah, well, it's like the kind of thing where like people don't say like, oh, you're not a real reader because you don't read Chaucer or something. Like people don't say like, oh, you're not a real like reader for like games are not a genre, they are a medium. And there's a kind of game for everybody in the way that like and so, you know, when you have books, it's like, okay, you have fiction, you have nonfiction, you have fantasy, you have sci-fi, you have mystery. Like there's that breadth in games too. You know, games aren't a monolith. And I think it's so important to really appreciate them as a medium instead of a genre, because I think so much of like the sort of like, oh, what's a gamer is based on this idea that all games are one genre of thing. You know, but that doesn't make any sense. You know, like if you think about it, it doesn't hold the water. It doesn't hold water. Games are for everybody, and I believe that fundamentally, and in all levels of accessibility. You know, people of, you know, every walk of life, and that's why they're so cool. I just want people to love games and understand games. And there's like, even if you're not like a gamer yourself, you don't consider yourself one, there are games for you. Like that is such a narrow and kind of outdated definition of who plays games, because everybody does, even if you don't necessarily know it. You know, you engage with interactive media, and it's such an amazing frontier where there's so many amazing stories being told and experiences being had. And I just want to invite everybody to explore it. So
I think that's such a like good wrap up to our discussion today. If you have any sort of final thoughts you want to say, like a social media you want to plug, Brooke, this is your space to do so.
I mean, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at the Stellar B. I can here. Let me write it in the chat so you can put it on screen if you want. And feel free to message me. I'm happy to answer questions or just, you know, give thoughts as needed. You guys are going into a really amazing time and experience in your life, and I'm so excited for you, because college is so amazing and intense and sometimes painful, but it's really good, and it sort of helps shape you and help you find who you are. And it can be difficult, but it's always worth it. And New York is a wonderful place to be too for that. So I'm so excited for you guys. You are you're embarking on a journey, and it sounds so cliche, but it's so true. And you're gonna be okay. It's gonna be fun. You're gonna learn so much, and just hop into it, both feet, and you'll be all right. So.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great evening. And this is our cue to say bye. And Ali will wrap us up. I don't know. The live is still going.
Ooh.